Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Kinder Institute on Constitutional Democracies, America at 250 Global Perspective Lecture. We are really glad to have you with us tonight. My name is Matt Friedrich. I teach constitutional democracy and political science as part of both the Kinder Institute and the Honors College, which is exemplified by our signature shared course called Revolutions and Constitutions. Enrollment's coming open soon. In the spirit of collaboration and shared purpose, tonight's event offers a new global perspective on the American founding, a view from Iceland and Canada. Canada had a front row seat to the early American experiment, and Iceland, the world's oldest democracy, was watching from a bit farther away, which perhaps earned them a patient perspective that we could all perhaps use more of. This series is a portion of how Kinder is commemorating our nation's 250th anniversary. It's one of the ways we are widening our lens to better see how the rest of the world understands what was unfolding here in this place. So thank you for spending your evening with us, and thanks to our partners at the State Historical Society of Missouri for helping to make this series possible. Before we kick off tonight's program, please take a minute to silence your cell phones. And if you have an empty chair around you, we would ask that you would scoot just a little bit to the center to create space that anyone that may walk in late. As you can see, there is no way of sneaking into this room. So with that accomplished, I am now pleased to introduce someone who represents a theme of this series, highlighting the work and voices of students in the Master of Arts in Atlantic History and Politics program. Please join me in welcoming Tucker Black.
Thank you, Dr. Friedrich, and good evening, everyone. Tonight we have the honor of welcoming someone who grew up in our neighbor to the north, Canada, and found herself in an influential role in her new home of Iceland. Eliza Reid is the former First Lady of Iceland, but she is also more than that. She's a best-selling author and an activist. She sold 2 best-selling books with a third on the way. She is also the co-founder of the Iceland's Writers' Retreat. During her tenure as First Lady, she used her role to advocate for gender equality, a topic she is still passionate about today. In tonight's talk, Eliza will discuss how storytelling has shaped and can reshape our perspectives of the United States in an interconnected community. She will push for us to view ourselves as authors in creating our own story in this global community. She will do this through the lens of herself and her experiences in the United States, through hearing the stories of Americans' lives, and to a cross-country road trip when she was 12. Eliza will argue that the United States story is not a fixed one, but an ever-evolving and changing one. Iceland is a nation that not many in the United States will think about as being important. But through being a strategic partner in NATO, a very important one, and through being an economic partner with the United States being one of the largest trading partners of the island of Iceland, it is a massively important part to ourselves and to the global community. So for this reason, and many others, I am honored to welcome tonight's speaker. Velkommen, Eliza Reid.
Thank you. Thank you. Can everybody hear me right? Yeah, thank you very much, Tucker, for those kind words. I've had such a pleasure of being here in Columbia for the past couple of days, and I've met so many students like Tucker here at the university, at the Kinder Institute, and it really makes me optimistic for the future, having a chance to hear so many enthusiastic, knowledgeable, entertaining students and what they're doing and how they're going to change the world. So thank you so much for taking the time to introduce me. Now, you'll see from the very 90s photo that I put up here, you may be looking, you might be thinking, why didn't she go into modeling instead of writing? I don't know, but I thought it would set the tone for the remarks that I'm going to be doing here today, and I'm really grateful and honored to have honored to have been invited. And congratulations on your 250th. That's quite an achievement. Now, a word of warning before I begin the talk as well. I'm going to teach you a little bit of Icelandic. We got velkommen there at the beginning, but who here speaks Icelandic? Excellent. Excellent, I have free reign then. But don't worry, you're going to thank me because it's kind of the best secret language that you can know in the language. So we're going to start right away with the first phrase. Yes. And there is a test at the end. No. Að ganga með bók í maganum, and it means to walk with a book in your belly. And that is the idea that we all have a story, or stories, that we are waiting to give birth to. And this, of course, comes from the language and the culture that brought us the famous sagas. Those are what British author David Mitchell called textual treasures, and what other modern Icelandic authors claim give us confidence, probably meaning both as a nation and as writers. And that's what my talk is about tonight. Lots of family photos here as well for you. It's why and how storytelling has shaped my adopted homeland of Iceland, how it has shaped me and my experiences of and in the United States, but maybe most importantly, how storytelling helps transform some ordinary encounters into extraordinary journeys, and why that's important for everyone, how we can use our stories to help do good things. Now, I've been invited here, as you know, by an esteemed institution at an esteemed university, but this is not going to be clearly an academic lecture. You're going to hear stories and look at personal photos, and I hope leave inspired. But we do need to begin with a very brief scholastic overview for you, with Iceland, of course. And it's this country highlighted in the North Atlantic. Who has been to Iceland? Nice. Who has not been but wants to go? Who did not put up their hand? Excellent. That, you're all passing the test so far. I like to say that because I wasn't born an Icelander, but I chose to live in the country and to raise my family there, and I feel that entitles me to brag a little bit more about it. So here we go, quick bragging. Starting with some data for you. This is me a long time ago with our former president, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who you will hear later more about. Iceland, the world's most peaceful country. The country closest in the world to closing the gender gap. The country most welcoming of the queer community of the OECD nations. And the world's third happiest. Any guesses as to the happiest? Yeah, this is you guys are on it, okay. Our population is edging very close to 400,000 people, yeah, and is increasingly, happily, I would say, diverse. So as you will see, maybe from the many images in this presentation, we still have a lot to learn from some other countries in that respect. And of course, we are a storytelling nation. And we have some of the highest book writing, book publishing, and book buying rates per capita in the world. We also have the most per capita statistics per capita in the world. And we are sometimes known, therefore, I'm trying to click this. One moment. We are sometimes known. That's a hint to the tech people, if you can get me to come in. The light went out. Click. But now we're gonna, can we fix that? Okay. We're gonna have to click a lot otherwise. There, okay. Is it working? Apologies. Anyway, where was I? We are sometimes known as the Sögueyja, or Story Island, because of being the home of the Icelandic sagas, because our capital city, Reykjavik, is a UNESCO City of Literature, and because we have a Nobel Prize winner in literature. which I used to say meant that we have won the most Nobel Prizes per capita in the world. And then it transpired that our wonderful neighbors, the Faroe Islands, have a Nobel Prize winner in physics. And so I thought, well, that's fair. The Faroese, they get the Nobel Prize winner. But we'll just say most Nobel Prize winners in literature per capita. But St. Lucia has a Nobel Prize winner in literature. So we're all friendly competitors in the per capita Olympics here. Anyway, it's fair to say that my adopted nation's storytelling traditions inspire me. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about personally my own stories and my stories about the United States. Okay. Now, as you already know, I am from Canada, and I grew up just outside of Ottawa, the nation's capital, on a hobby farm, meaning that we had sheep, chickens, ducks, and other animals, but that farming wasn't my parents' main income. My dad was a teacher, and my mom was a homemaker, and she put together that little slide for me because that's what parents do, even when you have middle-aged children. And now we heard a lot about the United States in Canada, from television, from radios, from newspapers, and in fact, when I was growing up, our earlier Prime Minister at that time, Pierre Trudeau, who's the father of our most recent former Prime Minister, Justin, he once famously said that living next to the United States was in some ways like sleeping near an elephant. No matter how friendly and even-tempered is the beast, one is affected by every twitch and grunt. Now, I had some ideas of Americans, of course, from watching TV, which we got a lot of American television in Canada. And some of the stereotypes were, you spell things differently. Many people own guns. You can buy cheese in a can. You have to pay to visit a doctor. You are friendly and open. You're confident about your abilities. You encourage dreams. And then I traveled to the US, and I met real live Americans, and I got to draw some of my own conclusions. This is the first trip I remember from going to the US when I was in grade 3, 8 years old, to visit my aunt who worked in Manhattan. And New York City kind of had quite a reputation in the mid-1980s. I see the subways there when I was looking at it. But of course, people were incredibly helpful and friendly. I seem to have got a balloon there that I obviously didn't let out of my sight for all of the moments that I was there. Several years later, we took numerous road trips when I was a kid because we would go to see my family in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and it was always shorter to go through the US. And we'd cross over in the Sioux and go through Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota as well, also with some great memories from those trips. And finally, after my second year of university in Toronto, I took my first ever big trip without a family. And over the course of 6 days, I took a giant, I was young. I took a giant happy face from Buffalo to Seattle with 2 friends and a fake ID. Because I was only 20. On that visit, I went through 14 states, and I experienced both geographical and cultural diversity. The photos don't always match what I'm going to say because, you know, in the olden days we didn't have photos of everything. But anyway, I saw my first palm tree. I went to a drive-through liquor store. I saw the world's largest fireworks store. I drove across the Golden Gate Bridge. This is actually, I had my eyes open. This was just this moment. And I gambled in Vegas. And I did not win, which is good because fake ID. In Amarillo, I felt reinforced my stereotype because I saw actual Texans wearing huge cowboy hats and giant belt buckles. And until now, I took my only trip to Missouri. I have no photos of it because, you know, we only had film. After those early experiences, I saw kindness, I saw curiosity, I saw contradiction, but sometimes my personal experience helped me see why some stereotypes were unhelpful, why lumping people together in one two-dimensional group closed me off from learning new things and seeing new perspectives. And I hope the converse was true, that people in New Mexico and California and Oklahoma didn't think that Canadians were unabashedly polite and lived in igloos. And this experience is what we call in Icelandic glögt gests augað, or a guest's eyes can see more clearly. But it was that physical travel, which I was so lucky to experience. So I got to see things with my own guest's eyes, to educate myself and to draw my own conclusions. And in fact, travel and international relations, that idea that countries have different characters, goals, and ambitions, that often we don't get along, but that much can unite us, kind of like people, became a passion of mine. And the experience helped me to find out about my place in the world, helped me to learn what my stories were, and maybe most importantly, that we can always find some commonalities. So I say Z and you say Z, but that's just a fun quibble. We both lend our neighbors sugar when they run out. We both crave security, belonging, shelter, love, and an opportunity to make something of ourselves, to write our own stories, if you will. I'm really not good with the clicker, am I? There we go. Oops. I apologize, because I'm Canadian. I can apologize a lot. And storytelling. That is not obviously only an Icelandic phenomenon, but thank goodness, a global one. Storytelling not only entertains, but teaches us about ourselves, about others, helps us to find our place in the world, develops that sense of belonging that we all crave. And we have those big stories, that help us to unite diverse groups. Stories of heroes who overcame the odds, and I know you have so many of those connected to your own history here. Stories that galvanize us into action. And I'm going to talk about that more shortly. Now, I was so fortunate to grow up in a storytelling environment. My mom has this tremendous skill for spinning yarns, complete with captivating characters and narrative arc from even the most mundane moments, like buying pasta sauce at the grocery store. And growing up for me, storytelling became a toolkit for managing life. So here, perhaps, I want to diverge again for a moment to tell you the story of how I ended up here in front of you today. That is how I became First Lady of a country I had hardly ever heard of, and what I tried to do with that unexpected opportunity. It's also kind of one of my favorite stories and an extremely unlikely story, so I hope you'll indulge me here. Now, after that road trip in my university years, I went to grad school at Oxford. Here's the photo from that. And there were a lot of Canadians and a lot of Americans at Oxford, but people kept telling me about this one guy from Iceland who is supposed to come up now when I click. There we go. And all I knew about Iceland was that its capital was Reykjavik, because when I was growing up, I had played a lot of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego on a borrowed Commodore 64. And this means that I kem af fjöllum, or I might need a click assistant in a minute so it's faster, or come from the mountains, meaning that I was new to this. I didn't know this. So this Icelander and I, we would talk every now and then, and I got to know a man who was smart, kind, and very funny. Now one day, imagine this, there was a party at the college. It was a fundraiser for the rowing crew, and this is how the fundraiser worked. It's going to involve, okay, we did this. Yes. Now members of the team, who were mostly men as I recall, each had one paper cup marked with their name on it. Aha. We party attendees, we could pay £1 for 5 small paper tickets. Yes. Which we would mark with our own names. Oh, it's all working here. We distribute the tickets as we wished between the cups, but I don't know how to animate that. You have to imagine that part. At the end of the evening, the men would draw one name out of each cup and take that person out for a meal. Now, I'm not a spontaneous person, but in that moment, in that party, during that raffle, I decided to give fate a little push. I had a £2 coin, and so I bought 10 tickets, and put 8 of them in Goodney's cup. Not all 10, because stalker. I figured that would greatly increase the odds of winning a date with him, but beyond that, I couldn't possibly be committing myself to anything too long-term, could I? You know how this goes. Goodney drew my name, and while many other students enjoyed a kebab outside the college gates, he took me to a 3-course Italian meal at Luna Capresi's, bottle of red wine and all. I didn't actually know whether that meant he was interested in me or whether this was just what all Icelandic men were like. But soon we were an honest-to-goodness couple. And if anybody's been to Iceland, you might recognize the Jökulsárlón glacial lagoon there. And eventually, in the following years, as he finished his doctorate degree in history, and I began working, we moved in together and then got engaged after I proposed to him on a weekend trip to Cornwall in southwest England. In 2003, I arrived in Iceland to build a new life for myself. I had moved to the country for love, but I wanted to stay for me, to establish my own raison d'être for a happy and fulfilling life in Iceland. I signed up for an Icelandic class, and then another Icelandic class. I got a job. We bought an apartment. Here it is with our futon. And at 27, I had my first mortgage. I got laid off from my job. I took a third Icelandic class. I started doing freelance writing work, which became busy enough to become full-time freelance writing work. And eventually, I was editing Icelandair's in-flight magazine, and I co-founded an annual event called the Iceland Writers Retreat, which we have hosted annually in April since 2014. And because I worked so much with writers and writing, I was often asked if I was walking with a book in my belly. Remember the phrase from the beginning. And I was always like, no, that's just the extra cheesecake that I had after lunch. It's a mom joke, people. On the home front, Glynny and I got married. And then we moved to this 1,200 square foot home in Vesturbæden, in the old part of town. I became an Icelandic citizen. Glynny began his dream job of teaching history at the University of Iceland. And we had 4 children at 2-year intervals, with 3 boys to add to Glynny's and then a girl to add to Glynny's older daughter from his first marriage. And if any of you have children, you know that this is the kind of photo that you get, right? The 2-year-old is like, wait, I'm not the baby anymore. And the oldest one doesn't know how to hold a baby, etc. And then in 2016, everything kom mér í opna skjöldu, or came at me with an open shield, and the story of my life changed. This kind of encapsulates my day-to-day life in 2016, the kids. And one evening that year, in early April, I was washing up after a spaghetti dinner for the kids when the landline phone rang. That was unusual. I picked up, and a man introduced himself as a pensioner in an old age home in a remote corner of the country. Now, the man had looked up our number in the phone book, and he told me he had seen Goodney, my husband, on television earlier that day, and he just wanted to pass on the message that he really thought Goodney should run for president in the election that was set for June, 2 months later. Now, Iceland's news that day and around the world was dominated by the recently published Panama Papers, if any of you remember this, a leak that identified several global leaders who had money hidden in offshore tax havens. The leak implicated my adopted nation's prime minister, who ultimately resigned. And concurrent to that political crisis was a scheduled presidential election. So we have both a prime minister and a president in Iceland. The president replaced the Danish monarch after Iceland became independent, and so the role is seen as a sort of nonpartisan unifying figure. And the outgoing president of 20 years had announced that he would not be seeking re-election. Now, Goodney had been invited to appear on live television to comment on this crisis. He and a colleague were in the studio for about 6 hours that day, explaining the situation using neutral, understandable language. And about 15 minutes after that first phone call, telephone rang again. And a group of police officers in the south of the country really wanted to leave the message that they encouraged my husband to run for president. And the calls kept pouring in. And I thought, wow, Vinny's really going to chuckle when he gets home and I give him all these messages. And yet when he did arrive, he was sanguine. He showed me his own phone with dozens of DMs and texts relaying the same message. Running for public office was something he had never considered before. But almost literally overnight, this unusual prospect became a serious matter, drawing enough attention that it required a thoughtful and formal response. And there was hardly any time to overthink it. I think I just distilled it down to, would we ruin the kids, and did he want to do it? We just had to catch the curveball life had thrown at us. And Gloonie announced his candidacy at the beginning of May 2016, and the election was 7 weeks later. It happened that fast. And on August 1st, I became the Forsetafru, or literally, President's Lady. Now, I was thrilled and excited and nervous about the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to serve my adopted country, but I was also intimidated. What if I broke a rule? What if I brought dishonor to Iceland, to my husband, to the dignity of a respected office? Was I allowed to just talk about whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted? What was I supposed to wear when we met kings and queens? This, turns out. Could I express opinions on social media? Order a tequila shot in a bar on a Friday night? Now, I'm the definition of a rule follower, aside from that fake ID period when I drove across the state. The person who declares, I declare that sweater that costs $20 over import limits when crossing the border. I read the instruction manuals cover to cover for every appliance, from toasters to dishwashers. But there is no rule book on how to serve as the spouse to a head of state. All I knew was that I wanted to try to confound expectations about people who serve in the role of spouse to a head of state. That in a role that wasn't a real role, that came with no budgets or dedicated assistants or policy directives, but did have a giant invisible platform and mic from which people might listen to me a little bit more, I still wanted to make the most of that opportunity. I wanted this to be a wonderful story. And it turns out that storytelling was often my way of making the most of the role. In 2019, I wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times, we don't write the titles, which they called, "I'm a First Lady and it's an incredibly weird job," in which I talked about the persistence of seeing women in these roles as some sort of genteel sidekicks. Well, I wrote, I'm not my husband's handbag, which he can grab as he runs out the door and display silently by his side during public appearances. The metaphor was kind of clumsy, but it struck a chord. Because obviously not everyone is married to a head of state, but many people, especially perhaps women, know what it is like to have a partner who is better known than they are, and what this does to one's identity. And I was expressing myself using the written word, which is always popular in Iceland. So I aimed bigger. In the pandemic, I had this idea for a book, maybe the book sort of in my belly. Secrets of the Sprakar, and that's the other Icelandic word for you. Sprakar, which means extraordinary women. And the book was my love letter to my adopted country, but also shared more stories, those of many Icelandic women, some of whom you see in this photo, who've done all kinds of things to examine how life is in the best country in the world for women. And in doing so, I was both trying to talk about important issues, such as gender equality, but also showing us that we all have important stories to tell. And then I decided to move to fiction and murder mysteries, following an Icelandic trend in Nordic noir, I guess. And that book is an homage to both Iceland and to public service. And fiction really allows you to explore complex issues in a different way and to share important messages. Now, I traveled to the US numerous times during those years to promote my books, and I amassed a great number of interesting and fun stories from them all. There was, okay, I'm holding my hand here so it gets right. There was when I went to celebrate my birthday alone in Houston, and I inadvertently stumbled into one of those all-you-can-eat Brazilian meat buffets. I did not know that was a thing. They come with the meat on the swords and everything. When I had to take shelter from a possible tornado. When I was invited to ride into the stadium in my very first rodeo. And then I got a pin to prove it. When I sat behind some replica Oval Office desks in Dallas and in Little Rock. And then I visited the actual Oval Office. And you can't take photos in there. But you can take a photo of when the then president called my mom back in Canada. You can see it says Mom's Cell on the phone, if you look in there very well. That's a whole story on itself. But what did I learn from all those stories? That we all have a story. That we all have a chance to contribute to bigger stories. And it reminded me to be grateful for my family, who taught me that to have a good story, you just need a bit of imagination, a zeal for life, and an interest in connecting with others. Now, my point in sharing all this was the idea that stories could help me to understand the world and my place in it, even if that place was very different from where I thought I would end up. But we write our own stories. And storytelling helps remind us that when we find ourselves a fish out of water, or in unexpected moments, we can rely on the stories we have told ourselves, the experiences we have accumulated to help us along the way. As I said earlier, it's a toolkit for helping us manage life. There we go. Now, my third book is coming out at the beginning of May. That's just a gratuitous plug for it. And it's really about these unanticipated moments, these times that we learn more about ourselves. I'm going to have just one sip of water, if you'll pardon me for a moment. Do you see how I conveniently left the photo of the new book while I'm having a sip of water? I'm just throwing that out there. But now I want to move from the micro to the macro, and I'm going to tell you another story from Iceland. And it begins, of course, with more Icelandic. Ég þori, get og vil. And that means I dare, I can, I will. And it's from the chorus of the unofficial anthem of a song during the day in 1975 when the women of Iceland took the day off. Now, as a gesture towards recognizing equality, the UN dedicated the year 1975 to women. And that year, women made up 5% of Iceland's members of parliament. Women who worked outside the home earned 60% of what men earned. So, to prove exactly how vital their contributions were, the women decided to take a day off. Now, note that they called it a day off, not a strike, in order to appeal to a broader range of people to take part. And 90% of the nation's women are estimated to have taken part in the protest on October 24th, 1975, just over half a century ago. Those women Those women who worked at home or on the farm took leave from childcare, cleaning, or meal preparations that day. Those who worked outside the home did not show up to their jobs. Even women on fishing vessels stayed in their bunks, some of them sending telegrams of support to their sisters back on land. And can you guess what happened? Nothing happened because the country shut down. Elementary schools were closed. Preschools were closed. There was no telephone service. The bank managers had to fill in for the female tellers at the bank. Flights were delayed. Hot dogs sold out in the stores. because fathers were struggling with what to cook for their children. My husband vividly remembers his father burning the rare and precious hot dogs because he didn't know how to cook them properly. And meanwhile, 25,000 women buoyantly gathered in the center of Reykjavik, which is over 10% of the nation's entire population at that time. And the day, you can imagine, generated waves within society. It galvanized the population to know that we all make a difference. Within a few years, in fact, Iceland had elected the world's first democratically elected female head of state. There she is at her inaugural address in 1980. And she served in that role for 16 years. And now our parliament is 46% women. Our president, prime minister, and the majority of cabinet are women. And for 16 years, the World Economic Forum has said that we are the nation closest to closing the gender gap, although we are not there yet. Now, this was not a fictional story. This is fact. Not only did it result in these tangible changes, but it continues to inspire because it reminds us of the power that we all have to make a difference. This movement wasn't led by a single charismatic individual. It wasn't led from the left or from the right. It was a gathering of people who wanted to make their society better. It helped to bring out the extraordinary in all of the ordinary people out there. And I tell you this not specifically because of the theme of gender equality, although that's one of my passions and a subject that I try to imbue into all my speeches. I tell you because of the danger of good enough. I said that we're not there yet when it comes to gender equality. As you can imagine, we have gender-based violence, inequality in lots of areas, and a global backlash. But that happy story of the women's strike also brings a word of warning, especially for those of us in these privileged situations. And I suspect that is, in some form or another, many of you here now. In Iceland, we're so fortunate we live in a peaceful, happy, high-income country with a high standard of living. Here in America, you have been taught that you live in the greatest country in the world, and that must be a lot to live up to. Now, sometimes, I meet people who don't really think the fight for greater equality applies to them because they got a good education, they have a job they wanted, they feel safe on the street and in their homes, and they're busy people, and things really are good enough for them. Whether it's striking for gender equality or standing up for any other injustices they are witnessing, things are good enough for them, and they don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to risk the imperfect but acceptable situation they have. But I ask regardless, is good enough really good enough? When it comes to gender equality, just as an example, is it good enough if a woman works full-time in a paid job and then returns home to take on the lion's share of household and family coordination? Is it good enough if a woman in a public role endures far more abuse online and in social media for just expressing her opinions? If the intersectional challenges of racialized women, women with disabilities, women of foreign origin are not sufficiently addressed? If some men feel that they don't have a place in a society that rewards a fairly narrow definition of what a real man should be? If non-binary people or the queer community overall feel as if their rights are constantly being chiseled away? I don't think so. And that's just in the realm of gender equality. But there are so many ongoing injustices in so many fields that their overwhelming number threaten to engulf us all. They are simply too many to mention here. But let us also not allow too many to mention to immobilize us into inaction. We cannot do all things for all people, but we must use our voices, use our influence to continue to speak up for what we believe is right, live according to our consciences. Otherwise, others will finish writing our stories. Now, in my nature, I am an optimist. So to me, that story of the Women's Day Off reminds me that we can all make a difference. That when we support each other, we can really help with change. My own story of unexpectedly becoming First Lady of Iceland reminds me that we need to lean into uncomfortable feelings and make the most of the chances we are given. And the privilege of having made my home in Iceland, the Storie Island, has supported my and others' literal story making. Now, I've told some stories about my unexpected adventures, about traveling in the US, about how a group of women galvanized a nation, what that inspires, but also what it can foretell. And what is the common denominator here? Of course, it's people. And you have many, many of them here, in all shapes and sizes. And you know what? You Americans, I say with respect, everyday Americans, y'all are pretty nice. And I say that as a member of the nicest nation on earth. You know, one of the things that I love about being an immigrant is that it has introduced me to a much more global group of people. If I had stayed in Canada, probably almost all or all of my friends would just be Canadian. But in Iceland, I have friends from many different countries, including several from the US. And I want to tell you that your compatriots who are living abroad or traveling to different places, often in service to their nation, you should be proud of them. They help form our international perspective on the US, and they do it admirably. Now, I could talk for ages about Americans I have met on my travels and in my education, but just in Iceland, I'm going to brag about some of them. There are Americans contributing to making life better for people in my country. From Greta, who founded an award-winning puppetry festival in the village of Komstangi, population 600. To Daniel, the elementary school teacher and stand-up comic who helps promote multiculturalism in a nation experiencing rapid diversification. To Cedric, who coached my son in basketball and now has a permanent home and a wife and kids in his adopted country. To Sarah, who I don't have a photo of, I'm afraid, but she is the nurse who always manages to find my narrow, squiggly veins without hassle or pain whenever I go to donate blood. And she's very good at taking photos of them. My work bestie, Erica Jacobs-Green, is the other co-founder of the Iceland Writers' Retreat, and we met while her husband was serving as Deputy Chief of Mission in Reykjavik. Honestly, I could have bored you with my entire speech about how great the Americans are who I know in Iceland. But these friends and acquaintances, we have different backgrounds, we have different interests, we have different stories. But we find common ground through our love of Iceland, from being immigrants in the country, and from just doing our bit to nudge things in the right direction. We're all writing our own stories, and maybe we crop up as supporting characters in each other's, but we certainly inspire each other's metaphorical and real creativity. All of these people are að ganga á undan með góðu fordæmi, or walking ahead as a good example. All these great Americans, they're very valuable, but that message of public service, of contributing without trying to be an activist or the ringleader, that's what I think is important here. We are all role models. We all have voices. We all have an obligation to speak up. In March 2022, I got to travel to London for the British launch of my book, Secrets of the Spracher, and I was honored to be asked to deliver remarks at an International Women's Day event at the Canadian High Commission. And in that speech, I said something I think more relevant than ever. It is this: we are interconnected as never before. And if I may add, especially in the current climate, we bear a responsibility as never before to be role models, to use our voices, to fight for what is right, to speak up about injustices, to elevate the voices of those who cannot, to be vigilant in fighting for a more equitable world. Now, I delivered those remarks 4 years ago, very soon after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which was, of course, on everyone's mind. And in Europe, that attack was on our doorstep. And we were all following in awe of the Ukrainian president who refused to abandon his people in the face of near overwhelming force and offers of escape, who chose to stand up for what he believed in, to write a different story than the ones others had presented to him. Some people, those who might least expect it, are going to change the world. Most people aren't, or not on their own anyway. But I'll tell you something else. Most want to do their part, even if they don't define it that way. I got that incredible privilege of serving as the First Lady of my adopted country. Fair to say something I never expected? And was I perfect? Obviously not. Did I make the most of the opportunity? I hope so. At least I tried to nudge things in the right direction. I'm often asked what serving as First Lady taught me. And after serving in this unofficial role during volcanic eruptions, a global pandemic, war in Europe, the global rise of authoritarianism, and the rollback of many human rights, despite all that, it made me more of an optimist. And I already said I was an optimist. Not to sound cliched, but the reason is that I got to glimpse, in the most ordinary ways possible, the best of humanity. Of course, there's big picture stuff like awards for bravery or sporting records, artistic accolades, grand openings, but what really sticks with me are the everyday acts of people of all ages, genders, backgrounds, and abilities who are slowly but surely, without even necessarily trying to do so, making their communities, our society, and our world a better place. Isn't that what we all want to do? How many of you are alumni or collected to the college here? Hands up. Let's see. Some not. That's great. Isn't it? It's nice to see people and connect with old friends. But you, by being here, you're also giving your time and your energy to keeping memories strong between new and old generations of students, between the university and the broader community. You are investing your time in learning about new countries and cultures. Maybe, and I hope, you're meeting someone new this evening, because if there's another stereotype I know about Americans, it's that you're very good about talking to strangers. And in doing so, you remind me, and I hope each other, that we all have a role to play in nurturing mutual bonds of respect and engagement. We can all stand to improve our compassion, tolerance, and understanding of the different challenges people face and how each of us, public figure or not, can help to alleviate them. We don't need to cover everything, but as I've already said, most people want to do their part. And that doesn't necessarily mean calling yourselves activists. It doesn't necessarily mean running for office. It doesn't necessarily mean donating large sums of money to good causes. It might mean volunteering at your church, synagogue, or mosque. It might mean finding a good job to provide for family. It might mean teaching yourself a new hobby to push personal limits. It might simply mean reaching out to another human being for connection, for finding common ground. But recall what I said about the world and its size. I grew up on a farm in Canada. I've built my life and my home, I'm raising my children, on a sparsely populated island near the Arctic Circle. And here I am now, over 3,000 miles away, talking to you in person. And it wasn't even that hard to get here. We are interconnected. This is Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa, a Filipina journalist and global advocate for democracy and press freedom. And she said, I'm paraphrasing here, protecting our democracies is not reserved for heroes. She did a lot of research online and talked about how lies spread faster than the truth online. But she also said the good news online, where so many of us live these days, inspiration spreads faster than hate. It is a good clap thing. It also means I can get a sip of water. these stories to connect and to inspire. You are the authors of your destinies because we are all storytellers. How is your story going to end? Others maybe want to write something different around you. But what is the story you are going to tell your children and your grandchildren? Hvað gerir þú þegar á reyndi? What did you do when times got tough? Our Nobel Prize-winning author, him of the per capita, Halldór Laxness, who so much valued the power of storytelling, said in his Nobel acceptance speech that the only things that endure are those which are told. And that's why I structured this talk around stories. But of course, I was invited here to talk about America on the eve of your 250th birthday, to provide a global perspective. It's an important moment. These are all photos I've taken in America recently. A defining moment. And America, no one doubts, is at a tipping point. The world is watching. And I confess, I struggled with what to say in this speech, with how to share a global perspective that is both honest, yet also encouraging. I don't need to lecture you about what I mean. I stand before you as a very proud Canadian, a proud Icelander, a believer in the rule of law, in cooperation, in compassion, in kindness, in standing up for what I believe in. But I think most of you do too. So I remind myself of those stories where we can see that in action. Communities where people check up on their neighbors, where we interact in real life and not merely online, where we have respect for and value our contributions and those of others. Like many of you, I'm saddened and sometimes frightened about what the future may hold. But to paraphrase from one of my husband's speeches, part of life's beautiful uncertainty is not knowing what is to come. I remind myself that the United States is the home of the brave. I recall my many American friends in Iceland and elsewhere who never give up. And I look to history stories for inspiration of regular people meeting the moment, or who, as we say in Icelandic, say hingað og ekki lengra. Enough is enough. We have to write our stories with the tools we are given. So if there's one message, and I hope it's a galvanizing one, it is that the world is watching you. Please nudge, even if it feels small. Please remember the power you have as individuals. Remember way back at the beginning of this talk, I talked to you about my mom and how she's good at telling a story about buying pasta, that kind of stuff. Her storytelling gift, anyway. Here's my mom. I didn't tell her that I put her in this presentation here. So during the pandemic, Mom started a little habit. She decided that her goal every day was to do one thing that would help someone else. It could be calling to check in on a friend, or baking a pie for a neighbor. It could be giving an extra warm smile and a friendly chat to the cashier at the grocery store. Each little gesture of kindness has a ripple effect. And I'll tell you, it makes you feel pretty good, too. Think of one thing you can do today. Remember what Maria Ressa said. Inspiration spreads faster than hate. Inspiration spreads faster than hate. I'm going to leave you with a very short video from our 2023 Women's Day Off in Iceland. Because guess what? We still have to take these strikes because we're not there yet. And just to show you how this concept continues to inspire, and we are going to persist until we reach our objectives. Now in this video, they are singing the song whose lyrics I mentioned earlier, Ég þori get ovel. Two things to note about the video, it's short though. One, the weather is not usually that nice in October. And when you see the people gathered there, remember that the entire population of the Reykjavik capital area is smaller than that of St. Louis. stories are what shape us and help us to understand the world around us. Our stories help us to navigate unexpected change, to recognize new possibilities in our own lives, and help us to inspire others in their stories. And in telling them to one another and to the world, we help to rewrite the global narrative, one story at a time. What story will you tell? What actions will you dare to take now? Not just to help yourself, but to help write America's own saga for the next 250 years. Pick even one thing a day. That's how stories change. And I'll be cheering you on. Thank you. The stairs make me nervous. Do they make you nervous?
A little
And the big
bit.
steps.
Big step.
Whoop. There we go.
Wasn't that terrific? That was really amazing. We're
Thank
just
you.
so glad to have you here. My name is Catherine Rimpf. I am a professor of history at the University of Missouri, an affiliate faculty member in the Kinder Institute, and I am the dean of the Honors College. And I'm going to be the interlocutor today, fielding your questions. To ask questions, there is a QR code that you can scan, and the questions will magically appear on my iPad. This is the wonders of technology.
It is pretty fancy, yeah.
It's pretty fancy. I will say that actually there are several people here tonight who were in Iceland a couple of years ago, where we got to meet Eliza Reid for the first time, and it is really so delightful to have her back. Are you ready to start?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I have to, because I'm Canadian, I did run over, and I apologize for running over in the talk a wee bit.
Okay.
Different.
Well,
Anyway, sorry.
You're forgiven. Do we forgive her? Yes. Okay. All right. So our first question, oh my goodness, what a coincidence. The first question is from Jay Sexton, director of the Kinder Institute.
I know who he is.
You know who he is?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a long question.
Okay.
All right. As you might have heard, the U.S. President's nominee to be ambassador to Iceland is former Missouri Representative Billy Long. And a recent comment he made, joking that Iceland would become the 52nd U.S. state, understandably sparked concern in Reykjavik. Long has since apologized. Here is Jay's question. Given the long-standing cooperation between our countries and the importance of mutual respect in our bilateral relationship, what advice would you offer Ambassador-designate Long and to all of us Missourians here about next steps so that we can refocus attention on the substantive work of advancing our shared interests and values? Just a little, easy question.
That was a softball. It was the first
Softball,
question.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
We want to ease
Yeah.
you into it. No.
I think this is an interesting example. The U.S. is one of a few countries where I believe it's at least 50%, if not more, of its ambassadors are political appointees, meaning they are people who are appointed by a particular administration, often in recognition to work that they have done to elect that party or that president, as opposed to somebody who has worked in in the foreign service of a country for decades, often before they become an ambassador. I'm going to give you a circuitous answer, but I'll get there. I bear tremendous respect for foreign service officials and ambassadors. I've had the tremendous honor and pleasure of interacting with many of them from many different countries over the years, especially when I was First Lady. And one of the reasons that I wrote Death on the Island, the Murder Mystery, which is all about diplomats, is that it's kind of an homage to the diplomatic service, so that people don't think it's people who, walk around drinking champagne all day and don't do things. Because it's this wonderful, wonderful tradition that is hundreds of years old often of people connecting with other people. It's what reminds us why it's so important for a nation to have its representative in another nation is to nurture those bonds, because we can achieve so much more when we have the person-to-person contact. Having said that, that is also a reason why it is a more complex and nuanced position than maybe some people think it is. And I think the example that you've given there, which is at best a tasteless joke, and at worst, the Icelandic Foreign Ministry officially called in the charge d'affaires of the American embassy to complain about this, which is a very serious diplomatic step. And that's not a good foot to start off of for a country. So I hope people always want relationships to go well. And people, I think, want to give people the benefit of the doubt. As a Canadian who finds jokes about a nation's sovereignty deeply offensive, I think that, and with no room for humor or joking, I hope that the ambassador-designate learns the value and the benefit of a productive, respectful dialogue.
Good. That's good. So I'm going to ask a question here that I think probably many people in the audience are wondering. Will you run for political office?
Did someone ask that?
Yep. The iPad doesn't lie.
The iPad does not lie. That's a, yeah. I've asked that actually a lot, which I find kind. And in addition to respecting public servants, and maybe this is unpopular, I do respect politicians, because, in Iceland, in Iceland and Canada, you don't do that for the money, obviously. You don't. People do it, I hope, in service to their nation, right? Because they want to make their country better, and I have a deep respect for that. And I love politics, and I love having good, healthy debates with my friends, with who, if I disagree on their opinions, I think that's really fun to have a healthy and respectful debate about things. And I think more women should go in politics. Having said that, I don't have any specific plans to go into politics, but also in life, I have this huge platform from being the First Lady, former First Lady. Arguably, and probably then unfairly, more so than if you were one member of Parliament out of others. But if there's anything that life has taught me, it's that you have no idea what the future will bring, so who knows?
Yeah, you don't know, right?
You don't know. But anybody thinking of running for office, you should do it.
Okay. Iceland is a world leader in renewable energy per capita. Renewable energy.
Aren't we straight up though? I don't even think we need per capita for that. Okay.
The per capita is in the question.
All right.
But
okay. Yeah.
Renewable energy is presumably more affordable to build in Iceland than most of the U.S. due to the abundant natural resources. From an Icelandic point of view, how prevalent are concerns about global climate change? Yeah. Does climate change continue to be a prevailing, often discussed issue by Icelanders?
Yeah. I smile a bit at one part of the question, the assumption that, this is good for you because Iceland has so many natural resources, like coming from the United States. I would argue that you also have a fair number of riches and natural resources, right? A little story, talk about storytelling. Iceland does not have, sources of oil. It has a lot of natural hot water and hydropower energy and geothermal energy that is developing. In the early 1970s, around the time of the OPEC oil crisis, for those of you who remember that, the government of Iceland thought, wow, we're really at the mercy of other nations when it comes to oil prices. And maybe what we should do is shift away from oil so that we aren't so liable to these global fluctuations. And the government at the time made a conscious decision to start shifting away from that to And that was, I would argue, more of an economic decision at the time than an environmental one, but to shift to the normal sources of oil, which means that we have over 90% renewables. Our biggest contributions to non-renewables in Iceland are our fishing vessels, some of them, and the aircraft, and some vehicles, although we have a lot of electric vehicles in Iceland. But our homes are all heated with natural hot water. And so it's very, and yes, it's a huge, the climate crisis is a big issue in Iceland, and the country is trying to be carbon neutral by 2040 and working towards achieving that, and obviously energy policy is a big part of that, so they're working to reduce, for example, electric vehicles, when they came to the country, were so popular because they cost very little to charge, because our electricity is so cheap, because it's all done through these renewable sources, that they actually had to introduce a tax on electric vehicle mileage because they weren't getting the income. We have a lot of tax on our gasoline and things to pay for roads and infrastructure and stuff. And because so many people were going to electric vehicles, the government was losing that revenue to build the roads, so they had to introduce a tax on electric vehicles. So yeah, I pay 6 kroner a kilometer to drive my electric car. But there's lots of different policies on how to do that, and that just in the way that the government does gender budgeting, so when they're doing all the allocations for its budget, Canada does this too, they try to look at it through a gender equality lens, to make sure that things are fair in that sense. So yeah, it's a big issue. Depends on the government that's in terms of where in the line it falls, but it's always there, yeah.
I want to remind everybody that you can use the QR code and keep adding questions to my tablet that are magically appearing.
You can also QR code outside and pre-order my memoir.
And pre-ordering helps her.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Helps is really important for books before they come out.
Yeah. The algorithms then are like, oh, maybe that's going to be a good book, and then it starts feeding to other people. So, yeah.
Can you talk about the experience of watching the U.S. threats against Greenland as a person who is both an Eastern and Western neighbor?
The experience of watching it, my sense in Europe is that that's the line. There's a lot of things that I would have thought were the line, but this seems to be the line. And hopefully it's what clearly the dynamic of NATO is shifting. Clearly that dialogue has upset a great number of people and destroyed a lot of trust, and that trust will take a long time to rebuild. And it has made other relationships stronger, as we have seen. I know that my birth nation's prime minister delivered a very well received speech at Davos recently about the rupture of the global order. And I think that we see many nations working to forge other alliances with other like-minded countries. But in the 21st century, democratic countries don't threaten another country's sovereignty.
You mentioned in your talk, and you mentioned in your book, that Iceland is a world leader in gender equality. How much of that do you attribute to law, policy, history, culture?
All of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my book sort of examines that a little bit. If there's an optimistic note, I would say it's not like Iceland, for thousands of years has had gender equality as a focus, and it's just always been that way. The reason that there was a day off in 1975 was exactly because there was such a huge gap in inequality. So the idea is that if you make a conscious choice, you can kind of make that change. And one of the things that I like to say is what has happened a little bit in Iceland is that conscious choice, is to say, you know what, countries that are more gender equal are happier, more peaceful, more prosperous, and have longer living populations for people of all genders, not one gender. And so this is something that is better for society. So if you are a government, if you are municipal government, national government, whatever you are, one would think that you would want to build your country up to be safer, more peaceful, more prosperous, happier, longer living. And so this is, that Women's Day off is often seen as kind of this turning point. Because after that, people said, well, we need to see more women elected in politics. And we elected the first female president in the world in 1980. And then people said, well, we need to see more people in parliament. And we have a parliamentary list system where people are on a list. And they said, well, you know, people don't elect women. And so these women made their own list and got in parliament on a list with just women. And then all the other parties scrambled to add women, you know, higher up to their list. And now most of those parties have this unofficial rule that on the top number of their list, they generally have gender balance. In fact, one of the parties has had to bump down women because they've had more women in the top part, and they need to have more men because it has to work both ways. So it is a number of things, but I think the key messages are moving past the point of debating whether or not that's something important to debating how we are going to get there, and there's plenty of room to do that. And secondly, even since I wrote that book in 2022, we are facing a global backlash. The pandemic accelerated that, but we are also seeing an erosion of trust. The Reykjavik Index, which is a gender equality index, shows that amongst young men now especially, there is actually less trust in women as leaders than there was in their parents' and grandparents' generations.
Huh.
And you know, and so there's this perception still that women don't make as good leaders as men. And it's a choice, this equality, or it's certainly, you know, there's a lot of arguments that, okay, well, it'll just happen naturally and the best candidates will rise up, and that's going to take 260 years or whatever the World Economic Forum is saying, and I don't really want to wait that long. And so I think that, you know, also in Iceland, again, we have challenges, we have a full women's shelter, you know, lots of issues, but I think we just need to continue to discuss it and have it in the forefront. But it is a combination of a lot of things, yeah.
Great. Got another question about the environment.
Okay.
How has Iceland handled AI's environmental, especially water requirements?
Yeah, that's a really good question because, yeah, AI uses a lot of energy and data, and that's a growing export, I guess you could say, industry in Iceland, is because we have lots of water, we have lots of energy, and so there are more data farms in Iceland. It's, you know, our biggest sectors are tourism and fisheries, but then third to that is sort of the energy. We also have aluminum smelters in Iceland, and that again is almost like this indirect way of exporting water because we have so much water in the country, fresh water. And I would say it hasn't been, you know, the AI whole thing has been discussed very, very rapidly, very recently. So I haven't seen like as much discussion on that specifically as other things, other than kind of as an opportunity for organizations to have data farming there. But, you know, my kids will say, don't put your, you know, say, draw a photo of me looking like a cat because it's going to cut down 3 trees or whatever happens.
Got a couple questions about storytelling.
Okay.
So, how has social media changed the concept of a nation's single story?
Well, interesting. Pluses and minuses. I don't know that many nations have a single story, too. I think we interpret things. I think there's a lot of stories, and I think it depends on your perspective and your point of view. Maybe I say that as a Canadian, which is like perpetually navel-gazing and trying to think, like, what is it to be a Canadian? So I'm not sure about that. You know, AI, it's another form of storytelling. And I think we need to have a lot of respect for those that, you know, whether that is the written word, which is what's so strong in Iceland because there's no materials, but storytelling and creativity can happen through music, they can happen through art, they can happen through dance, and social media has changed that. I think the downside is that how it's shortened our attention spans, right? And our ability to focus on one thing, whether that be if we're wanting to watch a movie story and we can't do it without flipping through our phones, or we can't read long-form journalism anymore because we need to have the little bullet point summaries of things. I think that is a challenge that we're going to see later on, especially for young people, because as our brains develop, we need to have had that habit to do that. Even when I was writing my murder mystery, and I handed in the first draft, and my editor said to me, "Oh, this is great, but the person dies on page 80, and no one will read that long without someone dying." Because I'm a new author, and they, don't, and they'll just be like, "I'll move on to the next book." And so I actually moved it so that you start like at the death, and then you go back in time. Because I wanted to sell my book, so I sold out. So I like social media, AI, all these things. As we get older, I find as I get older, I'm like, oh no, what's going to happen with all of this? But they're here. We have to learn to deal with them. We have to bring out the positive things of them, but be realistic as well about the threats and the challenges. I think the human beings, our species, we're always going to be storytellers. That's kind of what distinguishes us in many ways from other species. And there are always people who want to tell stories. There are people, I go everywhere and people are telling me about the books that they're going to write, the books in their bellies, what they're working on. So I don't think that we're going to lose that ability, even if it sort of changes and shifts somehow. And maybe in some senses, it'll allow us to reach different groups of people with their stories, which is also a good thing.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question, and so I'm going to give you a choice. Do you want one about your role as First Lady, or do you want one about Canada?
Can you, please do them both. I can do them short. Because I usually get asked about Iceland, so it is kind of fun to have a Canada question.
Okay,
but
I'm going to ask you
also
the Canada
like
question then. Okay. Yeah?
Well, ask me them both. I'll be fast.
Okay.
Busy.
Okay. Just the one about the First Lady is, when you first stepped into your role, did you face any obstacles in using your platform to advocate for equality and social change? And how did being from another country add an extra layer of difficulty? Did it, to making your voice heard?
Okay. Super fast on that. Being from another country, I get asked a lot. I'm actually the third First Lady of Iceland of foreign origin. The woman who was First Lady immediately before me is Israeli. And so that was great for me because people were already used to somebody who had a different name and spoke Icelandic with an accent and all that. So I didn't face any, I didn't go deep diving into the comments section to see what people thought, but I didn't directly face any challenges for that. And then it was the same when starting out. It's not like the day after my husband took office as president, I was like, now I'm doing this and this and this, because I was like, where's my rule book? What am I allowed to do? And and so it's a gradual process. But I eventually came to the conclusion that if there wasn't a rule book, I couldn't be breaking any rules. And it took me a little while. But then you just got to buy the memoir to see what happened.
Which you can pre-order.
You can pre-order now.
You can pre-order. So the question about Canada.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on the recent sentiments from Alberta for independence? This is another simple one, especially given Quebec's push for the same in the past. Is there a possibility of not?
Again, I should say too. There's
a
provincial election coming up in Quebec this year.
Is there a possibility of not a civil war, but harmful internal dissension and polarization in Canada?
Quebec and Alberta are two different beasts in some senses, because as you say, in Quebec there has been a tradition. The last referendum was in 1995, which I remember very well. My sense in Alberta is that it's a small minority of Albertans who talk about this and then get a disproportionate amount of press from it, and so I don't think anything will come of it. And in a sense, in the rest of Canada, there's just a resentment of like, guys, we need to be united right now. Stop doing all this stuff. Yeah. But the country, as an outsider, as someone who's lived outside of Canada for almost 30 years, but who goes back regularly and still identifies as Canadian and Icelandic, I have never seen such patriotism in Canada in my lifetime as I have in the last year. And that's a nice thing.
Okay. All right, well, I want to thank everyone. I want to remind you that we do have copies of Eliza Reid's book, signed copies, for sale out in the mezzanine. I can make it out to people if they want. What is it? There's a word for that. I've forgotten it. I'm middle-aged. What? Autograph them, but they're not, sorry? Personalized. Yes.
Personalize.
Yes.
I
Okay.
can personalize
So
them if you want.
you can buy a book. She can sign it for you. You can also pre-order her memoir. We are about to have a reception. We have light bites and I think drinks out in the mezzanine as well. So let's give one more great round of applause for Eliza Reid. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing this great series. It's really important for bringing together lots of generations and ages here and for constructive dialogue. Thank you. Yeah. Yes, please.